My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
On today's episode, I, Amir Khiabani, a fourth-year medical student, will be interviewing Dr. Andrew Little, DO, an emergency medicine physician and associate program director at the AdventHealth East Orlando Hospital. Dr. Little attended Shawnee State University in Portsmouth, Ohio for his bachelor's degree in biology and later found his way to the Ohio University Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine for medical school. During his time as a medical student and resident, Dr. Little became heavily involved in advocacy and held many roles within the American College of Osteopathic Emergency Physicians. Dr. Little continued on after residency and became a core faculty member at the Ohio Health Emergency Medicine Residency. Now he continues to serve as the Emergency Medicine Associate Program Director at AdventHealth East Orlando. Outside of the hospital, Dr. Little remains a dedicated educator and mentor on the EM Over Easy podcast, which he co-founded and hosts. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the DO or Do Not podcast. Today we have a really special episode with Dr. Andrew Little, DO. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
How are you doing today?
Good. I'm actually glad that you spelled out how to say your podcast. I would have just said the Do or Do Not podcast, but I love that you guys make it DO or Do Not.
We have to hashtag DO proud.
Yeah, that's right. DO proud.
So I did want to start, it was really exciting. I saw Dr. Andrew Little do a presentation at FCEP, the Florida College of Emergency Physicians, the symposium by the sea. I think it was a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And the presentation topic was train yourself. And it really, really was awesome to me because you just worked with these low fidelity models, made these low fidelity models for medical professionals, and they were cheap. Like the Canthotomy model was awesome. It was like $3?
Yeah, $3 when it's all said and done, 100%.
That's awesome. Yeah. I just mentioned that because I know we have pre-med students, med students, just look up the YouTube videos. We'll put them in the description.
Yeah, I'll send you some links.
Awesome. And, you guys can make it at home and practice for your rotations. So now that we talked about the present a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the past.
Excited.
Your past. So from what I gathered, you grew up in rural Montana.
Yeah, I'm number 5 of 6 kids. I lived in Montana until 8th grade, and then my parents moved me to the Midwest, to Ohio. Yeah.
That's awesome. How do you think that influenced your decision to go into medicine?
It was huge. My dad, growing up, ran a transportation company, and so I tell people he was a truck driver, and he did drive truck, but he managed a trucking company called Little Montana Transportation there in Bozeman. And when I was 7 or 8, he became a volunteer firefighter. He did that out of, some church leaders have pushed our entire membership to get involved in the community. And my dad, being who my dad is very methodical and went to the county and here's the ways you can volunteer. And the one that stuck out to my dad was to become a volunteer firefighter. And then over the next 5 or 6 years, he became an EMT and then a paramedic in the state of Montana. And then when I was 11, he sold his trucking company and went to college full-time at the age of 40.
Okay.
So originally with the goal to go to medical school. But then when I was 13, he was accepted to PA school in Ohio. And at the time it was just, he was 42, had 5 of us still at home.
Yeah.
And so couldn't take the 10 or 12 year break to go to med school. So at that time went to PA school, got a 2-year PA certificate, and then started working. So it was transformational for my family, not only for me, because I can tell you up until that point, education was always on the list of things we needed to do.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until my dad went back to college and proved that this is really important. And so it kind of not only changed my trajectory, but my other siblings' trajectories who, to be honest, might have not gone to college. And so, but that transformation for my dad going from being a regular community member to a PA in about 7 years, and then watching him go through that experience and then really seeing emergency medicine up front really was one of the driving forces why I wanted to go to medical school.
Okay.
100%.
Did any of your other siblings?
I have a little brother that's a nurse, and my other siblings all work at regular jobs.
Okay. And from all of that and your history, where did osteopathic medicine come from?
So, it's interesting. So I, again, growing up like most people, did not know there was a distinction between a DO and MD. And when we moved to Ohio, we moved to a small little community outside of Dayton called Bellbrook. And I remember the first time realizing at least recognizing that there was a difference. The family doctor there also did all the sports teams. Okay. And so I remember I played football and we got fitted for special mouthpieces and we went to his office, Dr. Mike Murphy, DO. And I remember asking my dad, I was like, what's this DO thing? And he was like, oh, he's a doctor. And then I didn't think much of it until, the next year when I was in my freshman year of high school, I was wrestling and I had a concussion with a neck injury and he did OMT on me. I was a freshman in high school.
Okay.
And again, was like, this is what all doctors do. I didn't know any difference. I just thought all doctors did OMT. Because my first experience seeing a sports medicine physician was somebody that was a DO. And so I got OMT in high school. And then we moved to a different town in Ohio where our sports medicine physician did not do OMT. And I was like, why don't you do OMT? And he's like, well, I'm an MD. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And so I was introduced to it in high school. It is this kind of new thing. And of course, living in Montana, where I think when I did, again, this number could be completely off, but it was like less than 50 DOs in the whole state.
Yeah.
And then moving to Ohio, which had a rich history with osteopathy since the 60s, was one of the first states to give DOs full practice rights. And then that kind of led to when I was an undergrad, had a couple really good advisors, a couple MDs, a couple DOs. But then when I started looking at medical schools, not that I didn't apply. I did apply to MD schools. I felt more at home at DO schools. Nothing else, just because it was definitely family oriented. Okay. It was whole person oriented. And I still remember I interviewed a handful, and I'll never forget when I went to OU, where I ended up going for med school, and something just felt right. This was the place to be, and it didn't matter that I was going to be a DO because I was excited to be at OU and work with the people there and be a part of their family. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad you hit all those points because those were most of my questions. But just rewinding a little bit back to your undergraduate school, just because, most of our audience is pre-med.
Yeah.
What did you do ultimately during undergrad that you thought, this made me a great applicant for the DO school?
Yeah. So I did stuff that showed that I was a person. I still remember when you interview for med school and they cared about my grades. They cared about my scores, but almost all of my interviews were about my 2-year LDS mission, my experience working as a unit secretary in an emergency department, the limited research I did in undergrad with rats, which that was still like to this day. If you have a chance to do rat research, find something else to do. But it was again that they were looking for the whole person. They were looking for the whole package. Somebody that performed well academically, but was a member of the community.
Yes, sir.
And somebody who would take that drive to be smart and to be thorough and to be academically minded and take that back to a community that they're a part of. And that's to this day, like, I still remember my interviews at all the different places, and we didn't spend a ton of time looking at my grades. We did talk about the F I got when I was a high school junior in biology that I had to retake when I was a high school freshman. But outside of that, it was about community and people. And that was always something that really stuck out to me when I interviewed at both. And when I even went and did visits with both, it was about people.
Yeah.
It wasn't about numbers. It wasn't about the stat sheet. It was about taking good people and making them into good doctors.
I think that's definitely one thing that is hard for students, especially pre-med students, to wrap their head around, is that grades aren't everything.
Yeah.
That you do need certain cutoffs, of course.
There's some minimums, 100%.
Yeah, but, as long as you are a whole unit, a whole person, and show that you're that person, you'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I still remember I won a service award when I was an undergrad called the Bear Hug Award from Shawnee State. And that was literally everybody asked about that.
Yeah.
I was like, what was that about? And so I explained that, I was a scoutmaster for my local church, and then I volunteered in the community as a tutor through my high school, and just things that, like, again, showed that I was a person that they could make into a good doctor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just along the lines of undergraduate and everything, when it comes to scores, we talked about scores, would you say that you were, in the middle, top, or anything?
I was in the middle.
Okay.
I don't want to sound cliche, but standardized tests have never been my faux pas. I've always been a middle performer, so it's the range to get into medical school. The minimum when I attended it was 21 to 27. If you got in that range, you had a 95% chance of getting into somewhere in the States. And so I was in the middle. I got a 24. That was competitive enough to get me interviews at most places, and then of course acceptance at a handful. So yeah.
Okay. I don't think anyone really knows what 24 is now because they use this new scale.
I don't even know what that is. I knew that as I said that I was old because now I know it's between like 495 and 530, and they got rid of the writing section and added another comprehensive section the same.
Exactly.
It's a completely different test, but middle of the road score. I got a 50th percentile score.
You just aged yourself.
I just aged myself.
Yeah. But speaking of age, we did I did stumble upon an article. We are sitting in front of one of EMRA's 45, under 45.
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't do the research before we sat down.
I had to, because you know what? While I was going through it, I saw that, there was a lot of amazing physicians. I went through everyone's bio, but only 3 of them were DO, and you're one of them. Mm-hmm. And that's just amazing. I'm glad to have you on this podcast representing DOs.
Yeah. If you want to talk about some instant imposter syndrome, is when I won that award. For 2 reasons. One, that list is a list of my heroes in medicine, including the other DOs that are there.
Yes, sir.
Lauren Westifer and Rick Pescator. 2 advocates for our specialty, great emergency physicians, and people who have done far and beyond more than I think I'll ever do. But then other people that you truly respect, and I appreciate you doing that research. Sorry if you can't. I know I'm turning beet red because my beet red sense is going on right now.
He's very red.
Yeah.
So now that we kind of talked about your undergrad, we do have audience members that are med school going into residency and stuff. I think what you said about pre-medical students kind of being that whole person kind of translates over to medical students.
100%. I mean, I will tell you that. Again, we care about scores. There are minimum cutoffs. Those cutoffs, because what do scores tell us? Scores are a predictor of how well you'll do on board certification. And from a residency standpoint, we really care about 2 things. It's about how you will perform clinically and if you'll pass your board exams.
Yes, sir.
Because I want to make sure that when you graduate that you pass boards and you get to be the full version of what you trained for. Because if you can't pass boards, then you can't really do what you trained for. And so scores do kind of give us some predictors for that. But that being said, I love seeing community service. Now, when I say that, don't do 100 different things. But if, I remember an applicant a couple years ago, not at my program now, but was on my previous program, showed that they spent 10 weeks. They had one thing that they did 10 weeks every week in med school. And so they showed consistent community involvement in this one charity. And then people who, are willing to, service. And I say service outside of the community, service of national organizations. That shows that you're invested in your specialty and the future of medicine. And then just other things that are well-rounded. I have to tell you that I love it when I see somebody who says they speak a foreign language, they play semi-competitive sports, they're part of a podcast, they're part of a blog. It shows that you're more than just somebody who's going to come and work. Because I have found, especially with an EM, which we can talk about how I think EM is the perfect specialty for osteopaths.
It is.
But it's really I'd rather take a really good human being and train them to be an EM doc than take somebody who's just a stat sheet with great boards and have to rub off some of their ineptitude or some of their social awkwardness over a 3-year period. So, no, well-rounded people make great emergency physicians, and that makes all DOs make great emergency physicians.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Speaking of med school, did you, as an osteopath, take USMLE?
I did. I took step 1. At the time, when I applied to residency, it was not just me applying for residency, and so I handed my wife kind of a map of across the country where we could live, cities that had training programs. And my wife really wanted to be within a couple hours of either her parents or my parents.
Of course.
Which at the time were in Louisville and Cincinnati. And so that meant that I was going to, or I had a sister in Michigan. So between kind of the Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, Western Pennsylvania. And so with that, I didn't want to limit myself. And osteopathic physicians had matched well into many of those programs. But some of them asked that you take USMLE Step 1. And so I took USMLE Step 1. I can tell you that I got an okay score. I got a 50th percentile score on Comlex and on USMLE. That's a common theme with me, a 50th percentile. Like whatever the middle of the road score is, that's me. But so I did take it. I would tell you now, at the time, I took it because I didn't have a lot of good advice or a lot of good information. I'm of the mantra now where, the Comlex has been certified as an appropriate exam. It's been out for over 40 years. They provide a 2-digit score so they can compare it directly with the 2-digit score for USMLE. Yes. So if a program is requiring you take USMLE, you have to question, are they going to question everything? Are they going to question this whole DO thing? Are they going to have a history of dealing with somebody taking Step 3 for Comlex? Or are they going to know how to navigate getting you board certified in your state? Because there are still some states as a DO, it's a little harder to get a license in that state.
Yes,
when I moved from Ohio to Florida, I had to petition to go through the Florida Osteopathic Association, which was fine, but luckily, I did an osteopathic residency, so I had an osteopathic internship. But, there are some states that make it a little harder if you're a DO, especially if you train at a 3-year program. So to me, it's if I was to tell you broad strokes, take Comlex and kill it. And then if the program won't accept that, then be okay not going to that program. So, and I will tell you that also is changing to where the number of programs that require USMLE is going down. There's been a big national campaign both within the AOA and MBOME. And then also at educational meetings where, myself and other prominent DOs within different organizations and different residency programs are pushing the conversation of, why are we still doing this? Yeah. Why are we requiring osteopaths to spend additional money, additional opportunities for failure, all in the name of getting a 2-digit score that directly correlates with the USMLE 2-digit score?
Yes, sir.
It's not like Comlex sends out your score and says, figure out what it means. Like they give a 2-digit score that's a raw number that is equivalent to USMLE. And yeah, so to me, it's the EM's more accepting than it's ever been of the Comlex. And so don't have, I didn't take the USMLE as a reason not to apply to emergency medicine.
I think that's what a lot of students right now, at least in my class as a fourth year, we struggle with that, especially emergency medicine. We do see that a lot of emergency medicine programs do require both.
Yeah.
I want to see both, but exactly what you said, Comlex provides that percentile, how you did against your peers and
100%.
everything. So it should be viewed as the same. And, that's a good segue. I do work closely with the Student Osteopathic Medical Association as well as the AOA. And if medical students, if you're facing any sort of discrimination on any websites or anything, please feel free to contact the podcast. We do try to advocate for students that are undergoing that kind of discrimination. So please feel free.
100%.
So yeah, getting back to kind of like your journey into this. So talking about emergency medicine, you gave it away. That's your specialty. Did you know automatically? I know you talked about your father and his path and everything, but was there any sort of like, hey, I might want to do OB-GYN or anything else?
Yeah. So anybody wants to reach out to my wife, let me know. She will validate the story. I think it was our third date. We had casually talked about me wanting to go to medical school. And at the time she was a pharmaceutical rep, mostly worked with primary care. And she's like, oh, you could do family medicine. And I was like, nah, I'm going to do emergency medicine. Like early on for me, that was it. I knew going in, I still remember the first day of med school, our dean being like, who knows what they want to do? And my arm just shot up. And he's like, well, it could change. And I was like, you don't know me, buddy. Like this is my entire life's been about doing this. But I will tell you that I was intrigued by OB-GYN. It's funny you brought that one up because it's the perfect mix of medicine and procedures, like medicine and surgery.
Yes.
And so I remember going into third year, I got my core hospital assignment, or in my lottery at OU, they do a lottery, and I reached out to the coordinator. She's like, list the top 3 things you want to do. And I put emergency medicine, OB-GYN. And so I did EM in the first half of my year and OB in the second half of my third year. But early enough to where if I wanted to do OB, I could apply for away rotations. And EM was a great month. Loved it. I was at a training program. And then I did OB. And I have to say that maybe the universe didn't want me to do OB because my rotation was with a single coverage OB-GYN that covered 3 hospitals.
Oh, no.
And there are no duty hours for medical students. And so I remember I was on with an orthopedic and a general surgery resident who had duty hours. And they had duty hours and they had their own clinics they had to go to, and they had one operative day they had to go to back to their main specialty. So literally I'd get a call from my attendant. He'd be at 2:00 in the morning. I'd be like, hello. He's like, Andy, I got a lady laboring over at Mercy. And I was like, I'll be over there. And so I don't remember sleeping that month. I had 2 young kids at my house. And I remember at the end of the month, I loved it. I loved delivering babies. I loved the OR, mostly because GYN surgeries aren't, 7 hours long. And it's kind of quick and dirty stuff. But I remember at the end of the month, I went to my wife. I was like, hey, how we feeling? And she was like, well, and she said something that was reminiscent of a quote my mom gave to my dad when he wanted to go to medical school. So when my dad came home and said, hey, I want to go to med school. And then he brought up PA school. And my mom was like, well, if you want to stay married to me, we're going to go to PA school. If you want to get married to somebody else, by all means, you can become a doctor. And my wife paraphrased that and said, well, if you want to stay married to me, I think we should do emergency medicine. But if OB-GYN is really that important to you, I'm sure we can find somebody else for you to be. And she said it tongue in cheek. And at the same time, like even on OB, like I did in all my other rotations, I found myself waiting for my pager to go off to get me to the emergency department. Because I remember on ortho, gen surge, IM, man, we got a console in the ER. I'd be like, all right. And I'd be running. As soon as they said console in the emergency, hey, little, I was like, I'll figure out what room it's in. I'll go down and ask. Because I wanted to be there. And even now, amidst everything that's going on in our specialty, like we practice awesome medicine. If you're wondering like, why is emergency medicine for me? I still remember my personal statement where I talked about how I wanted to take care of people regardless of their ability to pay. I really wanted to be the physician for everybody.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, we're the only physicians that the gateway's open. It's always open. 24/7, regardless of ability to pay. Like, that's just who we are.
Yep.
We're the physicians everybody went to medical school to be. I don't think many people went to medical school to say, I only want to take care of people if I take their insurance.
Exactly. If you can have a copay or something.
Or if they can afford the $300 for their procedure. Like, that's just not honestly who anybody that wants to go to med school is. Now, we slowly become those people because we want better schedules, or, we get fascinated with procedures. But we all went to medical school to be emergency doctors. The question is if you got shook from that through med school or not. So,
I like the way you put that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only reason I brought up OB-GYN, believe it or not, that was the boat I was in.
Yeah.
And my wife was the one that shied me away from it.
Yeah.
Not because, of anything else, but just the fact that she really just knew, her being in med school with me, she knew I wanted to do ER. Yeah. She knew that, she knew me better than I knew myself.
Well, and jokes aside, my we had that conversation, and, weeks later somebody asked, and even now when people ask, like, oh, did he always want to be a doctor? She's like, yeah, he had this idea that he wanted to be an OB for about a month, but I just knew my husband, and I knew that he always wanted to do emergency medicine, and I was just on board.
Exactly.
And so there's just something about being with the right person that knows you and is willing to help you make the right decision. So,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I hope she's listening.
This isn't marriage advice, by the way. Well, it is marriage advice, but for those that aren't married.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just a little bit more about just your time as a rotating student, or even during your residency. What was your experience like? Did you see that you were having a harder time than your MD counterparts, both with material as well as with the way you were treated?
I will tell you that I never saw any gross negligence of being a DO. I think the benefit there is having gone to OU, which, again, like I mentioned, Ohio has been a well-established osteopathic state for a long time. OU had a very, very robust clinical experience, which I know is not the case for all people to go to DO school. That's actually one of the reasons why I chose to go there, on top of other ones. Shout out to John Schneider in the admissions office, and Jill Harmon. Now, they're never going to listen to this, but if for some reason you know them, tell them Dr. Little says hi.
We'll send it to them.
But I have to admit that when I was on my away rotations, it was interesting to me to see how some of the programs I interviewed at were newer programs, or programs that, were in states where, probably more of their faculty were MDs than DOs, where there was kind of like, you're a DO student? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, well, let's see if you're any good. The kind of that mentality, but never any gross negligence. And then it was interesting training in a city, in Columbus, where there are 2 training programs. There's a 3-year university program, and then there was our 4-year community program. And we did a ton of cross-training with them, both at our children's hospital and our trauma center. And it was reassuring to see the glitz of training at a university hospital wore off very quickly when a critical patient came in, to where we were equals. And I would say that, my training in some aspects were superior because I trained at a community program where most of osteopathic training programs were based, where I was good at seeing all comers. We saw kids at our hospital, the university folks didn't, so I wasn't as scared to see kids. And so to me, I never truly saw that DO versus MD, I guess, abuse that I know some people have. I think I was insulated for that being in Ohio, and even here in Florida. The biggest hassle of being a DO at the time, now it's of course resolved because of the unification, was getting a Florida license and having to verify that I did an osteopathic internship, which was making sure a piece of paper was filled out correctly. But no, I've never had that DO-MD stigma. I will tell you that when I applied for jobs at a residency, and then initially when I was looking at leaving before I came here to AdventHealth, there were a couple places where just the little comments of like, well, you'd be our first DO, or you'd be our first person that's AOBEM certified. So a couple of those phrases where it was just like, if said around the wrong person, could trigger somebody else. But for me, some of that's an expectation, right? Because if you are going to a place where you're the first one, that's going to get said. Don't like it, it's going to get said. And so I kind of knew going in that somebody was going to make a comment as such, or my credentials were going to be called into question because I went to a smaller university, which osteopathic schools prefer.
Exactly.
Or not prefer, but there's a higher number of people that go to these small colleges that go to osteopathic medical school. And then going to a DO school that doesn't have the prominent name of, despite it being a state school, but not having the prominence, the school of Ohio State or University of Cincinnati. So, but yeah, no, it's just to be expected. And that's, unless if you're going to train at a place with a ton of DOs and work at a shop with a ton of DOs, or go, somebody's going to be the first, and be ready for that, because it's just human nature. So, don't get mad about it.
Yeah. I think we have to really thank, as an osteopath or a future osteopath myself in 9 months. Yes,
that's right.
Hopefully. I really have to thank you and all of the other osteopaths that have really kicked down doors for us, because that implementation of the single GME accreditation has really helped. And I believe you can speak on your experience as a residency director.
Associate residency director.
Associate residency director. I believe that it's made our lives much easier applying to programs.
100%. It's required people to recognize the other group exists. I will tell you one thing that was always at times off-putting. Again, I trained prior to the certification. I graduated. My program became ACGME certified within weeks of my graduation. But it was always interesting being like, "Oh, you're at that osteopathic program in Columbus." It's like, man, we've been around. I mean, we've technically been around longer than the university program. Like
exactly.
some of these osteopathic programs have been. We talk about first programs in the country. They talk about UC. They talk about University of Louisville. They talk about UT or St. Vincent and Toledo. And then you got to talk about Sparrow in Michigan. It started the same year some of those did. Like osteopathic emergency medicine is not new. And osteopathic training centers are not new. And I think unification has forced the issue of recognizing that, when EM joined in 2020, there was this, some people who were naive or didn't know, like, man, why do we have 55 more programs? And it's like, well, we've always had 55 more programs.
Yeah.
You just acted as if they don't exist.
Exactly.
And so these 55 programs that that transitioned were always there, always providing great education and sending people into the community and providing stellar opportunities for osteopaths for years.
Exactly. Just speaking of osteopathic manipulation and medicine and all that, being an emergency medicine physician, how do you try to incorporate the philosophy or the principles into your practice?
Yeah, so I think it's like any other tool, osteopathy is that for us. And so there are specific patient complaints where an osteopathic examination is a part of my exam, and where an osteopathic treatment is a first-line treatment while I'm doing their exam.
Yeah.
Usually musculoskeletal complaints. Typically, I found most people do really well, especially with shoulder complaints and upper and lower back complaints. People that come in with low back pain, you rotate them and you flex them and extend them. And while I'm diagnosing a lesion, I'm also finding their endpoints, and that documents well if they can twist and move. And then while I'm there, if I find something that's angry, I treat it and say, let's do this stretch together. And I kind of explain to them that we're going to do a little bit of manipulation, and they always ask what that is. And it's a modified stretch. I'm a big fan of FPR and muscle energy. So nothing that's really high impact. I'm not a cruncher, mostly because I don't think that's widely accepting among the general population. It's hard to get somebody to be like, hey, you're here, let me crack your back.
Especially
some people ask
ER.
for it.
Yeah.
But because it's rapid treatment, you don't see the benefits of that, where doing some of the other ones, FPR and muscle energy, are great. And so for musculoskeletal complaints, it's part of my physical exam, and then it's a first-line treatment that I offer in, as well as, hey, we just did this stretch. I'm going to give you some medicine to help calm down the inflammation and everything else. And so it's just a part of what I do.
Yeah.
And me doing it that way has made it easier than trying to make it a separate visit or a separate, because I do know EM physicians who do their physical exam, order some medicine, then go back and do OMM. And that's just a workflow that's never worked for me.
Yeah.
So for me, it's part of my physical exam, and then I initially treat while I'm in the room. So
Okay.
Again, and it's not for everybody, because as much as I would like to think everybody wants to get a hug from Dr. Little, it doesn't work out for everybody. Because that's the other issue, is OMM is a very intimate treatment.
Yeah, it is.
And so a lot of people, and I'll kind of gauge that as I'm doing my physical exam. My shoulders are the best example, because I'm a huge fan of the Spencer's technique. And as you're doing a shoulder exam, you can do a modified Spencer's while you're doing it. And you kind of get a patient's like, why is your hand in my armpit? Like you kind of like you get physical cues, or they'll just be like, hey, this is, and I'm like, okay, we don't have to do this. Give me some medicine. And but it's one where like I wish I could incorporate it more, but it's what I've found works. Is just with musculoskeletal complaints.
Awesome. Dr. Little did mention FPR. FPR is facilitated positional release, just for the pre-meds out there. Look up these techniques. These are awesome. And it'll have your mind a little bit more open to applying to DO school and everything, and kind of show you the difference between MD and DOs. Just to kind of wrap this up, just a quick question.
Yeah.
What was the best piece of advice, if you had any, throughout your career or education? Or if you had a piece of advice that you would want to give your pre-med self or medical student self, what would you pass along?
Early on in your training, make a decision of who you are. This is a piece of advice I got really early on after some failures, because that will help you define how your life goes. Are you going to be a reactive kind of person? Are you going to be selfish? Like, you just got to make some decisions, and you want to do it early, because you're going to have a ton of opportunities to where decisions are going to be laid in front of you, results are going to be laid in front of you, and you want to be a person that's known to be level-headed, methodical, not quick to react. And this is coming from somebody who, by the way, was a lot of those things. but got some good advice along the way. And probably the second piece of advice, if I could give a second one, is look up the idea of a personal board of directors. We ask so much of you as a pre-med and as a medical student. You're going to make some wrong decisions if it's just you. Yeah. You're going to make some wrong decisions if it's just you and your parents. So look up the idea. It's Harvard Business Review, Forbes. They've all got articles about it. And build one, because that will help you make educated decisions that are best for you now and best for your future. So those are it. Yeah.
Solid piece of advice. I really wish I had someone to, guide me through the stages that you guys are all going through. And here you are. That's why we have this podcast. So feel free, please, if you haven't already, just follow us on Instagram at the Do or Do Not podcast. We have a Twitter, lots of memes, to make you giggle and laugh. And also, please give Dr. Little a follow on his podcast, EM Over Easy.
Yeah, EM Over Easy podcast at EM Over Easy on Twitter and Instagram, and then we are on Facebook. So I appreciate the shout out.
Awesome.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tianyu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.